The following presentation is brought to you by The Realm Network.
Hey, welcome back to the DeMott experience on the Realm Network. For everybody who's not paying attention, look on the wall behind me. Hashtag BDE. This is the BDE on the Realm Network, and this is it. We're in 2016. A lot of good things coming our way, but I want to start the year off with a topic that's more of a serious nature. Everything's entertainment, and we have face value, and we have the football playoffs coming up, and we meet some really great people, but we're going to get serious for a minute, and we're going to start the year off like this. And it's no better person to start it off with for me than a return guest. Back in November of 2015, I had the honor of speaking to retired Colonel Robert H. Sholly, and it was on Veterans Day. It was not a better way to spend Veterans Day, and it was a great conversation. So now with this year and the things that are on people's minds, I've been to the ball fields. You're out in the park with your kids and the parents are talking about it. It's on the news, and you cannot ignore the fact that terrorism and Homeland security are an issue. So there's no better way to start the BDE and going into this year than to have a serious conversation with a man who's had over 40 years experience in protecting this country and other countries. With today's global fears, corporate security assaults, home invasions at an all-time high, it's the right time to seek help from knowledgeable sources. That being said, let me welcome back Robert H. Sholly. Colonel, welcome back to the DeMott experience.
Well, thank you very much, Bill. I appreciate the opportunity again. And Happy New Year to you and your listeners.
Happy New Year, sir. Thank you. So, Colonel, we talk about first of all, I always say it again, it's such an honor to have you back, and your role in not only national security, but worldwide security. There's three topics for me that lay, I think, are on the surface right now. And Paris being one, the San Bernardino tragedy being two, in no particular order, by the way, and then over the recent week in Oregon. And I want to say to all the listeners here on iTunes and watching the podcast, the Colonel's taking time, and he's on the phone, and that's how this is going to go. So if you just stuck with this handsome face, I apologize to the people who are looking forward to seeing the Colonel, but it's just going to be my face. The Colonel joins us on the phone. So Colonel, take it away.
Well, 911 is talking about security and terrorism and counterterrorism. 911 is a basic wake-up call to the United States that there were a lot of people out there who didn't like us. Right. The ugly American is no longer a matter of just being portrayed in theaters and shows and tourism, but it has come home to roost. The 911, of course, was executed by the organization of Al-Qaeda, and it was responded to by the United States by the global war on terrorism, and which is still ongoing. The idea being that if the United States and its allies would try to find these terrorists, then they could kill them where they found them. Right. And they've done a good job of that with Al-Qaeda. Unfortunately, another group has grown out of the Al-Qaeda base, and that is ISIS. They are laying waste to Syria and to the northern part of Iraq. They seem to be having some difficulties right now with the combination of air strikes from the United States and with the Iraqis retaking Ramadi and some of the other villages that ISIS had taken for themselves. But I get asked a lot of questions about, is it safe in the United States? Well, no, it's not safe in the United States, and you can get run over walking across the street.
Right.
But the idea being is that you have to be aware of your surroundings. You have to put yourself into a situation where you identify what is the biggest threat to your particular safety or your loved ones right then. And walking across the street, naturally, you're going to take a look to the left, you're going to take a look to the right, you're going to see if traffic is coming before you cross the street. So you've got to do that same sort of mindset as far as terrorism and criminal acts. Now, like in Oregon, those are not terrorist acts. Those are in defense, rightfully or wrongfully, of a couple of guys who a lot of people seem to think that they served their sentences properly and should not be recalled, and put back in prison.
So I think, not to cut you off, but I think the first question would be, in terms of vigilantes, is I guess what they're being called, is it not terrorism or an act of, because they took over federal ground, a federal building, and claim that they don't want any problems as long as they're not forced to act accordingly.
Right, and these are very patriotic Americans who feel very strongly about one of their own or two of their own being sent back to jail.
Right.
Now, whether that's the right thing to do, whether they have justification or not for me to say. But that, in fact, is not an act of terrorism in my definition. Now, Paris, on the other hand, is an extreme act of terrorism, and ISIS took it to the French because they were supporting the United States and other Westerners in Iraq, and that just even made the French even madder. Then they brought it to the United States, and San Bernardino occurred, and we all have heard the story over and over again of how our vetting process failed in permitting a visa to be given to the woman terrorist.
Right.
And that is probably going to continue because the United States simply does not have the funding to hire people to do the proper backgrounds that we are going to have. We can talk about the refugees at some point if you'd like, but it is something that is going to continue. Now, let me say something about TSA and the FBI and Homeland Defense.
Right.
These men and women do a magnificent job
Yes, sir.
of stopping plots and plans. They have stopped, I don't know how many, nor do I want to know. I just want to know that they are in fact capable of stopping all of these people, and they in fact are doing that.
And they're in a tough spot because the finger's always getting pointed somewhere.
Well, of course, and there will be failures on the part of individuals because we're all imperfect.
Human.
But the fact of it is that we have an organization, and it works for the most part. Now, vetting processes are relied upon by other countries, or we rely upon other countries for the vetting process to say if, in fact, these people are of good standards, good nature, and is this their address. Because we don't have the people, we don't have the linguists, we don't have the specialists in those particular areas where they can just jump in the car and go down and check and see if Mrs. Saeed lives at 15046 Abdullah Lane.
Right.
The overall operation of terrorism in the United States will continue. I have no doubt about that. But how safe are we? I would suggest to you that we're pretty safe. Number one, we have people in the federal government looking after us. We have people in the state government looking after us. We have even people in the local and communities who are doing their job of counterterrorism, keeping an eye on people or trying to. And overall, they do an outstanding job. Now, the ones that are going to slip between the cracks, that's just going to happen. But the American population should not fear every moment of the day that every time they step out of the house that they're going to get blown up by an IED bomb that's going to be sitting on the side of the road.
Right. Do you think to that point, because I believe they are doing a fantastic job, and I know that, and some of my friends and people I know in law enforcement, and after speaking with you, I don't feel like, just as the everyday guy, I don't feel that we hear that statement you made enough. We hear about this is what happens, this is what happens, this is what happens, and far and few between do we hear about what an outstanding job these agencies are doing. And I think that lets people sit at the dinner table and have a different conversation than the one of, oh my gosh, what am I supposed to do tomorrow?
Exactly. Now, having said all of that, there will be, as I indicated, there will be the odd moment, and not necessarily terrorism. It may be a misguided shooter. It may be an unstable person. It may be somebody who's just ticked off at the boss.
Right.
You know, we coined the term going postal for so many postal employees who kind of went off the rockers and shooting at post offices.
Right.
Well, guess what? Postal has now gone national. And what we have now is we have misguided children who are picking up guns and going in. We have people who, in fact, know how to make bombs who are doing that. We have people who are using automobiles as weapons to run over people.
In Vegas, yes, sir.
We have all kinds of different things that are being used, and it's not just guns. I mean, you know, we get a lot of business about gun control, and the president, every time something happens, says, oh, we need more gun control.
Right.
That's so much nonsense. But that's my point of view and my opinion.
Right.
But the whole idea is that we are at risk, though not to the point where we need to be afraid of going about our daily business.
So if we become a product of our own media, has the media, I don't want to use the term loosely or disrespectfully, but has the media hyped this? Because I feel like the word terrorism is thrown around freely now, and everything's an act of terrorism, and jaywalking will soon be terrorism. But if we hyped it up in the media so much that everyone fears for this, and then I guess to add to my question is, in your opinion, what can we do or what should be done to not so much make everybody feel at ease, because it's a fact of life nowadays, but the fact that you can go on with your daily routine and not look over your shoulder and treat everyone like they're out to get you?
Well, that is the big question, isn't it?
Yeah, that's a sticky. I know that's a tough question, but I figured let me throw that out there because I would love your insight on it. You have a tremendous world knowledge of this, so I know it must have come up in a few conversations.
Well, it appears to me that we as a nation need to get used to the fact that we are no longer protected by our two oceans. That, in fact, we have become just like the rest of the world. Now, we have, in fact, created some of these difficulties ourselves by some of our actions or inactions in areas of hostility like Iraq and Afghanistan. If we had done this, then we wouldn't be doing that.
Right.
If we had done that, then we wouldn't be doing this right now. And I'll leave it to your imagination of what I think we should not have done or
Yes, sir.
At any rate, the point being is that the ox is in the ditch, and now we got to get him out. So what I would suggest is everybody needs to be aware, just like when they cross the street, they need to be aware that an unattended package left at a bus stop may not be such a benign thing that somebody just forgot it. You know, the lessons in Israel should be learned in the United States. Now, we're not to the point of the situation of Israel just yet, but it may come a time.
We're a lot closer than we were 10 years ago.
Exactly right.
Yes, sir.
And who knows how long it will take, if any. Because you're not going to beat this ideology. I mean, this radicalism of Islam, we're not going to beat that anytime soon. The one thing that can be done is, I'm glad to say that a lot of Muslim communities are beginning to speak up and speak out. Now, I don't know where they've been in the past few years, but right now they're beginning to take some action because they realize that what these radical Islamists are doing is impacting upon them and their lives. When the Iranian Revolution occurred, poor Iranians in the United States were treated very shabbily, as to the extent of they started saying that they were from Pakistan in many cases, or they were from Turkey, or they were from some other country rather than Iran, because they simply didn't want to go through the hassle of being harassed because they were from Iran.
Guilty by association.
Exactly.
Yes, sir.
And so our, loyal Muslims in the United States, many of which serve in the United States military, are getting this same sort of evil eye, which is a shame. So you cannot paint the broad brush against all Muslims or those who believe in Islam.
Right.
I have many, many Muslim friends after my almost 15 and some months in the Middle East. And these people are just as law-abiding, just as creative, and just as innovative, and just as peaceful as anybody you have ever met. So it's not just the Muslims. Now, so if it's not a terrorism act, how can we handle the kid who is disaffected, who feels that he has been bullied in school,
Right,
and goes out and either steals a gun or borrows his grandfather's shotgun or his dad's M16 or whatever?
or goes on the internet and gets a gun.
Exactly. And then goes back to school and starts shooting people up.
Right.
Well, number one, the schools need to start defending themselves a little bit more, and I think they're well on the way to identifying those threats and those responses. How we affect the mental instability of people is an ongoing thing, and I don't know, nobody has the silver solution for that just yet. The other business of philosophy. People going into an anti-abortion or an abortion clinic and shooting them up. I don't know how you stop that. Or even the people who decide that they are racist and want to rid themselves of the people that they don't think should be alive.
Right.
And going into a church. I mean, those are problems, and those are societal problems that we as a nation should be addressing. And there's a lot of talk going on, but we haven't come up with any solutions except, in many ways, they say parental guidance. Where are the parents when these kids are growing up and not providing them support and knowledge and guidance? And in some cases, what is the role the religion plays in growing up? If a person goes to church on Sundays,
Right.
that doesn't necessarily mean that those individuals are not going to turn out on the wrong side of the coin. But chances are, if they've got a belief system that enables them to think of right and wrong and understand right and wrong, then some of this stuff may not happen.
Do you think there's enough, and this is more just so everyone's aware on iTunes and that we're talking, this is more opinion. This is not finger pointing, but asking the question, do you think it's, as a parent, I know, speaking for myself, I believe that we do everything above and beyond to make our kids smarter as they get older and going into the world. And I do believe it takes a village, the schools and the surroundings and your friends and all those things. But do you think we're doing enough? Or is it, or the other side of it, is it overkill? Are we over preparing so much that we're just scaring people into these situations and making them skittish? I don't know what the word is I want to say.
Well, I don't know. I raised 5 children myself, so I have a little bit of experience in that. I won't say that I did the perfect job, but I did a pretty good job, I think, because they all turned out to be extremely nice and well-caring and contributors to society. Of course, I'm not much biased, but the fact of it is that has to be the case. But in growing up and looking at how other people are raising their children, everybody wants their child to have things that they did not have when they were growing up.
Right.
And as a result, in my humble opinion, is they try to give them too much. And what happens is a kid begins to assume and gets into that I am owed category, and it's all me, me, me. That is where a lot of our generation, newer generations, have fallen.
The generation of entitlement.
Exactly. Now, that's not to say that everybody of those generations are like that,
Right.
because I have seen a great number of individuals who are going to do great things in life. I sit on 3 different Congress people's military panels when they select their nominations for military service academies. And the young people that come forward across the panel for interviews and trying to go to a service academy, by far are just really outstanding individuals. Of course, now you would expect them to be, because they have to be members of the National Honor Society.
Right.
They have to have certain grades, and they have to meet certain standards, and have done certain things in their high school career. So naturally, those are going to be extremely high, aggressive individuals who are self-starting and going to do things. But I am very encouraged by the people that I talk to in those ages. And I also go around to different high schools and talk about different things, success, leadership, and I am very impressed, again, by many of the questions that come out of the audience that want to know how to do better than what they're doing right now.
Yeah, I don't think we hear about that enough, and I don't think we give enough credit to that. I'm not a bit, I watch the news and I try to stay up to current events. And my issue is when my 7-year-old son asks me if everything's okay today, that's a problem, because we don't hear enough about the high school kids and the up and comers and the college students and the ones who join the military and are here for doing things the right way. We don't hear enough of that. And I personally feel like that enhances the problem, because if there's so much negative and there's so much, oh man, this is happening, there's nothing to drive those kids in the future. And I like to hear what you just said, and I don't think we hear enough of it or share enough of that. And that's just my personal opinion.
Well, you can be negative very easily. There's a lot of negativity in the world. I don't like to think of myself as being a negative person, but every once in a while I'll say, if this hadn't happened, doggone it, then this wouldn't have happened.
Right.
So I lay the blame on something else that probably was my fault to begin with.
It's amazing to catch everybody up. If you're just tuning into iTunes and catching up and just coming into the BDE, I'm on the phone with retired Colonel Robert H. Sholly, security specialist, amongst many other accolades. You go to www.roberthsholly.com. We're going to talk about your books again towards the end, and we're catching up to Homeland Security and the state of the world, if you will. And Colonels, if you could touch on, we just talked about it, but I think it's worth saying again. At least for me, it gives me clarity. The difference between terrorism and acts of stupidity, I'll say.
Well, to me, everybody's got their own definition, but there are some accepted definitions of terrorism. Terrorism is something that's an act that is designed to incur and cause fear.
And you've dealt, just so we're clear, you've dealt with terrorism and trained people and organizations all over the world on this.
That's correct. And sometimes, people will call terrorism just because they look a little bit differently. They might speak a little bit different language, and they do a criminal act, and people will call that an act of terror.
Right.
Well, that's nonsense. It's just, a criminal who got caught and who was taking advantage of perhaps a company who was in his country. And so it's really not terrorism. On the other hand, it could well be somebody who is encouraged by a terrorist group to do something in particular that causes fear on the part of whoever the target is. But bad things happen and have happened. Long time before terror was ever introduced into the United States as a common term, we dealt with it overseas a great deal. But terror in the United States is just now coming into its own as far as a word in the vocabulary.
Yeah, it's used quite often.
Things that have happened in the United States, acts of violence that nobody ever thought of being called an act of terror, because it simply hasn't come from a terrorist group. And that is the difference nowadays. The actual results are probably not so much different as much as it is, okay, what was the intent and who instigated it and why?
Right. Well, if we could touch on Paris for a minute, and again, this is all opinion based, but I think on your side of the conversation, I don't want to speak for you, but you have a stronger knowledge, so your opinion matters a lot more than what I think is the everyday guy. Do you think that now the France and not the and I don't know, so I'm speaking from pure asking the question, whatever their thoughts on terrorism and the country being at risk and things happening on their grounds, the U.S. has always gotten involved, and I don't use that term loosely, but been there for everyone else. And what do you feel Paris did to the, not only to the country, what do you think Paris did to the world when that happened? Is there a different mindset now? Does that make sense? You know what I mean, Colonel?
Yeah. I think Paris, of course, now there's been several acts of terrorism in Paris. Number one, when the newspaper or magazine used Allah's, Muhammad's picture in its issues, that created bad feeling on the part of radical Islamists. And so Charlie Hebdo, and that was why that particular attack occurred. Well, it didn't stop the French from still things that the Islamists thought they shouldn't, to include being part of a coalition with the United States and Iraq against ISIS. And so ISIS in turn said, all right, we're going to strike you at your homeland, and that is why the attacks in Paris occurred. Now, what they've done is they have merely created another backlash, and so the French are even more fully into the Allies' camp against ISIS in Iraq and in Syria. And that's just not going to, those isolated attacks are not going to frighten a state government. It might frighten individuals, certainly, and good, but not an organized sovereign government.
Do you think, so kind of shifting gears for a minute, in the news lately, do you think, and you know, I don't know how much of it I believe or not, the fact that what Donald Trump has said about the Muslims, so at the risk of getting political, do you think that enhances, do you believe the fact that it brings more people to ISIS now that Trump is making the statements he's made? Or is it just more things to throw out there in the news?
Well, I think that the Islamists will be able to use that as their sound bites and say, see what they're doing. They're refusing you to live in their country because you're not good enough. So they'll use that as a public relations bit on Al Jazeera or some other organization, some other television operation or media. But on the whole, I think that's going to go away soon, because number one, that's not a workable solution for anybody.
Right.
And number two, you know, there are ways of doing it without making such a big to-do about it.
So in your opinion, should there be someone like just tapping the Donald on the shoulder and going, hey, leave that alone?
You know, it's a free country.
You're right.
We have the First Amendment. He can say what he wants, but, you know, it's going to affect and resonate with voters one way or the other. People are all for him, or they're, you know, think, what a turkey.
But me sitting in...
You know, he says things for their news value. I don't think he really believes half of what he says. If he does, then
Right. We'll figure that out soon enough. But the difference between you and I sitting here and talking about this and the Donald who's all over the news, all over the world saying this, it to me, it kind of romanticizes the whole thing of people joining this thing.
Well, yeah. And, he says something, immediately the news media pick it up, it goes viral. It goes around the world, and other people who don't understand Americans are going to take the most negative interpretation of that.
Right.
So we can't have somebody to tell him, hey, you shouldn't be doing that. He ought to be smart enough to know what it's doing, and I'm sure his advisors are. But at the point, he doesn't care as long as he gets the news because he's in the business.
Yeah, it's entertaining. It keeps him in the public eye. I guess that goes back to my point on the news. When does it get to be a point where sometimes we don't broadcast so much or offer so much information that then in turn can be used against us?
Right.
Us as a country. So when you're traveling, and I know you're still doing your seminars, and you just mentioned earlier that as you go to high schools and you're speaking to the future of this country, what's the message as we're in this day and age with terrorism and ISIS and the things that are going on? What's your base message? What are the things you want to educate people on as far as security and things like that?
Well, my main message is I want people to be aware that we have a change in environment, and that there are ways and things that they can do to better protect themselves. They should not fear what they're doing, but as long as they're prepared for unknown things going on, then they will be better prepared should something happen. So I just really like to raise the flag that, hey, terrorism is here to stay. It's not going to go away. And just like other things in life that are negative, you can learn to cope with it. The Israelis have been doing very well, thank you very much, since 1948. and while they still have difficulties, they have the stabbings and the shootings and the cars being used as weapons. Israel itself is it's actually a pretty safe place to live. And I expect the United States to be the same, and I would not want anybody to get to the point where they are so panic-stricken that they see the boogeyman, because when they do that, the terrorist group wins.
Yes, sir. That I understand. So
in traveling, I just want people to know, hey, we're still the greatest nation in the world.
Yes, sir.
And bring it on, because we've managed for 200 years, and we're going to manage for another 2,000.
And I think the bottom line, I think you just said it and touched on it earlier as well, is that's the state of the world we're in. And while some of us didn't grow up in this time, I guess at 50 years old, you get acclimated to the things that are going on. So I think it's important for the young people, because you talked about the school shootings and you talked about, touched on the racism in the churches and all these things. And I just want people, I guess that would be the message for me, is like, don't panic and don't give into it, and don't feel like you can't live your life. And I think that message needs to be said a lot more than what we've heard. And I feel better when you're saying TSA and Homeland Security and you mentioned the FBI and all these places that kind of get beat up a little bit too much in the media, that are doing a hell of a job, because it's a tough job, and you can't control something that you can't find.
That's my basic story.
Well,
it's here, it's landed, and we're going to take care of it.
Well, Colonel, I can't, again, thank you so much for your time and your information and just dropping the knowledge here on the podcast. As always, I look forward to every opportunity I get to talk to you. I appreciate everything you're doing out there with the young people. I want to remind people that the Colonel has 2 books out there, and they should both be read. 2 that are on Amazon: Young Soldiers, American Warriors, and The Soul of Success. And for everybody at iTunes, go to www.roberthsholly.com for all information. And Colonel, I believe that covers your speaking engagements and all things of that sort.
That does. Thank you.
Colonel, once again, Happy New Year. Thank you so much for your time. I appreciate everything you do for us. Travel safely, and we'll talk soon. Thank you very much, sir. To everybody, that we just got another great visit with Colonel Robert H. Sholly, and I have to say it's an honor to speak with him. I appreciate his time on the phone as he's traveling and all the things he's doing starting off the new year. So I always say, sometimes we have a serious conversation, and we're talking about the great United States of America and the times we're in. But as always, I say it like this, and this is how we start off the new year. I'm Bill DeMott. This is the Bill DeMott Experience. Do what you say what you mean what you do. Happy New Year.
Visit VinceRussoBrand.com to sign up for exclusive VIP content. For just $4.95 a month, you get over 20 new video shows monthly, including Vixens Who Rule, The Swerve, and Shoot to Thrill, where Vince Russo interviews stars in wrestling and beyond. Listen to Vince and Jeff Lane discuss weekly news and rumors and review current and Attitude-era Raws. Also, watch the cult hit Bucket Full of Chicken next. Go to VinceRussoBrand.com and click the red subscribe button to join now.